Happy to welcome everybody. We will start at the top of the hour. Barbara Andelson, long time no see. Jeanette Stokes, how are you doing?
Fine. We're fighting right-wingers in North Carolina, but we've got good organizing going.
Good.
Yeah. Hi, Jeanette.
Hi, Susan.
But Jeanette and I have known each other since graduate school.
No, since 1969, when you were a senior at Smith College.
Oh, I forgot college.
Even I knew that.
Jeanette, I also saw that Smith is 150 years, and I was like, yeah, it does feel like 150 years.
Susan, I found something in my archives pre-water that you and I did a program together, and I have no memory of this, in Berkeley. And that would have been in 77, 78. I was there from 77 to 80, but I think it was at 78 through the Women's Center there. Anyway, I said to Mary, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I knew Susan that early.
Well,
one of the most memorable things for me was being at AAR when there was a panel in honor of Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, and Susan was on it along with Krista Sindall, and I forget who else. But Susan was the person who could make Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza's writing intelligible. Everybody else was making
no small feat, Susan.
Oh, Susan, help Mary.
Yeah, right. Well, and Jeanette, I've got it on my calendar, the celebration of the Women's Center at Duke.
Oh, good. I want to talk more detail with you about that because we have some requests of you and want to make it as easy as possible for you.
I helped to found the Women's Center at Duke Divinity School. And what a job that was.
1974.
1974. Yep.
Right. And then taught the first class on women in ministry at the Divinity.
Yeah.
Susan did along with
the first course on women anything
right.
at Divinity School, other than women as sinners, but that was a
right.
subtopic in many courses. And
we just had a magnificent celebration of the work of Judith Plaskow at the AAR this year.
Yes, I had to leave before that, but that was wonderful.
Oh my gosh, it was the highlight. It was truly the highlight. Just
yeah.
And Judith right there to receive her flowers, as they say.
Yep.
Just, and well deserved. Well deserved.
Gosh, yep.
So important, especially for Jewish women. I hadn't really that hadn't hit me as hard as it did there. The singular importance of her work for Jewish women in religion. And yet the president of the AAR, who is a Buddhist woman or studies Buddhism, I think she's Buddhist, but she certainly studies it. And she wrote a lovely note saying to the group afterwards that while she had gone back to read Standing Again at Sinai, she realized that in fact, the first chapter of it was as important and could be said if you substituted the word Buddhism for Judaism.
Oh, wow.
And that was really important.
That's very cool. Wow. Yeah.
She didn't have a chance to say it there, but she said it afterwards, and I thought, wow, great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Mary Hunt at Water, and I want to warmly welcome you as we settle in for an hour of conversation about a mystery story. And it's not every theological organization that settles in for an hour to discuss a mystery story. And the mystery story is called Surfacing, and it is the Christian Ginelli mystery by Susan Thistlethwaite. And as anybody who knows me knows, I'm a big fan of Susan's work, and I look forward to hearing her talk about it. Susan, of course, is a welcome presence. And I think really, Susan, particularly in the context of perhaps the most consequential election in my lifetime, as pundits and professors alike ponder the whys and wherefores of the election, books like yours shed a great deal of light on the deep background of our current situation. And that's really what I appreciate so much. It's the deep background that you're helping to excavate and to provide us with some tools. And, one of those tools is literature. And I really am delighted that Water has been able to do, not only with your books, but with others as well, a deeper dive for ourselves into literature. So again, Mary Hunt from Water, and Diane New is with us, the other co-director, and our interns, Wed and Magdalena, both hailing from Germany from the Irene program. Wonderful young women who are doing marvelous work here at Water. We couldn't do it without them, literally. And they prove my point that feminist theology is a team sport after all.
Yes.
I think if you can appreciate it as a team sport, you understand why we need people at different stages of life with different capacities and with, in their case, marvelous skills. Let me begin then as we settle in with a land acknowledgement. We at Water are on Indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland, the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples, the original stewards of this territory. We are committed to making clear the names of these lands and the communities and their members. We reside alongside them. We acknowledge the trauma that is deeply embedded in the foundation of this country, yet another example of what Susan will be talking about in terms of trauma. And we affirm the right of all people to bring their whole selves and their stories into this space. Feel free to put the name of the people on whose land you sit in the chat. It is a sign of respect. Let us take a moment simply to gather ourselves and to give thanks for these people on whose land we have settled. Yeah, it's a hard time. We were just saying before we started, it's a hard time in the history of the world, and it's a particularly hard time in this country. And I can assure you it's a particularly hard time in Washington, D.C. We don't know what's coming next. If we knew, we would tell you, but we don't have any idea. Therefore, things like this are really important conversations to have, both to stretch our imaginations as well as to ground ourselves in what's really important. And what Susan does in this book, I think, is really important. We'll hear from her for about 25 minutes. There'll be plenty of time for dialogue, for questions and discussion. I invite you to listen and enjoy. Susan slipped in the matter that she has some notes, which we might talk her into. We will be taking notes as well to put on our website, as we always do after a Water Talk. You get a follow-up email that has the video link to this session, and it also has the notes that we take and any other comments that are made in the discussion that we think are relevant and could help you to use this material both for yourself and for your colleagues and students and congregants and whoever else you are connected to. So I invite you to mute your audio so we have a clear line for this, and I will invite you when we finish with Susan's presentation to join the conversation. We will end at the top of the hour, which will be 2 o'clock here on the East Coast. You can re-listen or point other people in the direction of this teleconference by using our website, www.waterwomensalliance.org. Look under programs and teleconferences, and you will see several by Susan Thistlethwaite. We will also keep the Zoom on a little bit longer for those who wish to continue conversation a bit after 2 o'clock, but for the official ending, it will be a time to leave gracefully at 2. Let me then introduce Susan and her book. And I want to show you the book because the covers are great too. The artwork on this one is great. Surfacing. And it's a Kristin Ginelli mystery. And if you're a fan, you know who Kristin Ginelli is, that she is a character that Susan has created. But her life and her antics and her endeavors and her accomplishments are really quite stunning and actually, frankly, knowing people I know, very believable, very believable. It's published by Resource Publications. You can find it on Amazon or you can order it direct, and we'll put in the chat the link to the direct order if you don't want to use Amazon. So Wed and Meg, if you do that, that'd be great. It's probably already there. See? So I mean.
Yeah.
Susan Brooks Thistlethwaite is no stranger to water. She was with us in April 2016 to discuss her very powerful ethics book, Women's Bodies as Battlefield, returned in September of 20 in her new capacity as a mystery writer, exploring feminist theoethical concerns through fiction. The book that time was When Demons Float, part of a series about a feminist detective, the aforementioned Kristin Ginelli, turned philosophy professor and religion professor as well, whose daring do and smarts combine to address contemporary issues on campus: racism, poverty, ethnic oppression, and now in this book, free speech. Susan brings us the same detective professor, the fair Ginelli, as a smithy with a partner who is as a smithy with a partner who's a doctor, bears an uncanny resemblance to the author. But I digress. They say write what you know, Susan, and
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, right. Susan is professor emerita and president emerita at Chicago Theological Seminary, where she taught for 20 years. And she, of course, was president for 11 years at that time. Prior to the presidency, she was director of the PhD Center. And her own PhD, as was mentioned again earlier in conversation, is from Duke. And she was, I learned today, instrumental in setting up that Duke Women's Center that Jeanette Stokes mentioned will be celebrated soon. So I think it's great to see that someone who's an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ since 1974, an author and editor of at least 16 books, now in retirement, although I'm not really sure what retirement means in her case, maintains an active presence in print for years in her local Colorado paper, the Washington Post of happy memory, and other media outlets now, including a Substack that I read religiously, as it were. Her works include Interfaith Just Peacemaking, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Perspectives on the New Paradigm of Peace and War, a book called At Occupy the Bible, What Jesus Really Said and Did About Money and Power, and Orbis Books published a 10th anniversary of Lift Every Voice, Constructing Christian Theologies from the Underside, a work that she did with Mary Potter Engel, one of the most widely used texts in theological scholarship today. Susan is a founder and former trustee of Faith and Public Life, consulted for the Carter Center, Scholars in Action, and the Women Religion, Violence, and Power program. And she's been working, and I think this is really highly significant, as a white woman on anti-racism and against white supremacy long before many of us knew what it was. She's explored violence against women from every ghastly angle, and she has taught theology and ethics with a deep commitment to remaking the world, commitment to the environment, to social relations between religion and politics. It's a task that she continues now through literature as well as her Substack. Her knowledge of trauma theory and the practice of dealing with it add dimension to today's work. And I was happy to provide a blurb for the back cover. And here's what I said. I hope I captured it, Susan.
You did.
Murders make headlines, but discussion of free speech is more subdued, an often obscured topic. The two go hand in hand in this suspenseful novel. A man is found dead and as is now quite common, disruptive threats are considered protected speech. Detective Professor Kristin Ginelli and colleagues figure out the murder and push university reform. I conclude, policy changes can save lives. We were together last week in San Diego for the Water Feminist Liberation Theologians meeting at the American Academy of Religion. And Susan offered a terrific analysis and an impassioned encouragement to step up our efforts. Her mystery novels are a creative example of how feminist liberation, theology, ethics, and ritual can be useful. Welcome back, Susan, and thanks for another page turner that promotes justice.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much. And yeah, I turned to mystery writing because when I retired, I'd always wanted to do that. And then, you know, I didn't have time. But then I realized as I started writing these mysteries, they are what I have come to call performative theology. You take these characters and you have them act out feminist, womanist commitments to anti-violence, to the affirmation of the dignity and worth of women, vulnerable people. And so I have motored along with that. And as Mary says, yes, I use what I know. A colleague said to me in the first mystery novel kind of begins with a giant fight that breaks out in the faculty meeting. And he wrote to me and said, I thought the murder was going to happen at the faculty meeting. So it gives me plenty of material. But you know, university politics, as Mary is alluding to, this is actually a free speech policy of the University of Chicago that I am also trying to expose as a gloss over invitations to violence against women. And we're going to see a lot more of that. This novel is based on actual events that happened in California, where young women on swim teams were abused by coaches, swim coaches, and the Swimming Federation covered it up. And so I have taken that historical events, there are links in the novel, and just imported it into Chicago, where I mostly base my mystery novels. There are some based in Washington, D.C. And I was thinking about, you know, what I was going to say this morning. And well, that's morning for me. And the trauma that is a central feature of the novel. Excuse me, yeah, there you are. I like to see the faces of the people. In my own face, I'm familiar with it. So, but I base a lot of the psychology of the novel on Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery. Judith Herman is my Bible for dealing with violence against women. And she is, you know, it's trauma and recovery. And the subtext is the aftermath of violence, from domestic abuse to political terror. And domestic abuse and political terror are intimately related. It's very much the same structure. And I just wrote a Substack. My Substack is called No Fear, Religion and Politics, because I'm telling you, friends, these people are not getting my fear. That is the first move of the abuser, and I'm not having it. So not that we shouldn't be cautious, because not really don't trust what they say. But I am very invested in showing the dynamics of trauma in relationship to the abuse of young women. And so what has happened in the novel is that a campus policewoman, who's my other main character, Alice Matthews, who's African-American, is doing her rounds, and she finds a guy floating in the swimming pool of the university. He rolls over as she comes to try to pull him out, and she realizes he's the swim coach who abused her when she was a teenager in a suburb. So this triggers her. And trauma, as I'm sure you all know, but I'll just, you know, sort of put that out there. Trauma is a wound or an injury, a shock that overwhelms our emotional capacity to deal with it. And, you know, estimates are 60 to 70% of Americans have had at least one traumatic event in their life. Not all of this results in PTSD, but to a certain extent it does. And one of the things that the lingering effects that trauma has is that you don't feel safe. At any moment, things could go to hell in a handbasket, and it a constant state of hyperarousal, which is exhausting, of course, exhausting. And Alice goes through this. My main character, Kristin Ginelli, is pregnant with twins. And one of the things I wanted to bring out in this narrative is that, you know, lactating women can think. I know this is a shock to a lot of guys, but so she's, you know, we have two breasts, so she's able to nurse them both at the same time, but she's also on the speaker phone trying to pursue this investigation. And she's alarmed at the behavior of her longtime colleague, Alice Matthews. And I wanted to show, again, performative theology, I wanted to show not just fight or flight, which are usually the two manifestations of PTSD, but another one is freeze. And Alice has the freeze response. Now, I should say that I ran everything that I wrote about the trauma and the recovery by a graduate of CTS who has gone on in psychology. She's written a book on trauma, and Sharon Ellis Davis is been really helpful to me. I didn't want to say anything that was wrong about trauma recovery. And so she was a real good partner for me in running these themes past her and reading drafts, even as Mary did. And, you know, you sit and you write your thing, and it's typical for a fiction writer to have someone in a room over here, and then suddenly magically they appear on the street over here. Well, you know, that sort of era, you've got to look out for them. So, but one of the things that Herman says is that trauma is contagious. And I know this for a fact. In addition to teaching theology all these years, for a number of years in a Boston suburb, I was a part-time domestic violence counselor. And I had to go into therapy myself. I really could not do this as a full-time job. It is seriously traumatizing. And so I know that trauma is contagious. So I have tried to be very careful in the first person presentation of the trauma that Alice experienced to avoid the obvious triggers, but you can't avoid them all. And one of the other endorsers of the book, Sharon Ringy, New Testament professor, known well to Mary and me and others, wrote, "Trauma is a pandemic." And I also think that's true. And I think what has increasingly made this book relevant to our times is I firmly believe that these conservatives are trying to trigger people. They are trying to hook the experiences that people have in traumatic experiences in their past. And that can be paralyzing. So the political context for me is that trauma can be paralyzing if it is not dealt with. And I have I wrote a Substack on an administration of sex offenders, which seems to be the leading characteristic of people that Trump and company are trying to appoint. I think this on purpose. I think it is to send a message of permissiveness and extra legal violence that will then simply be enabled. Look at now. It seems like Hegseth is out, and God help us, DeSantis is in for defense. But how long women in the military have struggled to get the sexual harassment and sexual assault against them taken seriously by the military. And Hegseth has said it doesn't even exist. So this is a dangerous time for women. And I think one of the things that also works in resisting being traumatized by events is community, a community just like the one that's here on the screen, and naming it, and not have it go under the surface, undealt with, and without care. Somebody who has experienced one or more traumatic events in their life deserve care. They deserve care. And I'm trying to send that message. Now, the other thing that Mary brought up, and I have a subplot in this, is there's a new professor in my detectives department who is a womanist ethicist. And this is also based on an actual event. Again, the newspaper reports on this are linked in the, I can't help but have people have extra reading, and so in the end, there's extra reading. But this is a policy at the University of Chicago on free speech. So this young man on the campus of the University of Chicago has been on his blog writing diatribes against her for her criticizing whiteness, and published her office location, her phone, and this is in the real world. This isn't fiction. This is real. And the university, because it was free speech, declined to do anything about it. And so in my, another great thing about writing fiction is you can just fix that. And so my department chair, fictional department chair, the womanist professor, and my detective professor team up, and with the help of this great lawyer that I have in all my novels. She is based on my Smith College longtime friend, who has also been our lawyer. She declines to be acknowledged in the beginning of the book. But I just say, there's a lawyer who helps me out. And but anyway, they go after the university for this and succeed in getting this policy changed in fiction. In reality, they are examining the policy. I think, given how the acceleration of hate speech online, I actually think even the University of Chicago will have to change this policy because they're running such legal risks. I mean, there's no ethics in it that I can discern, simply that it might cost us money. So there's that. And all in all, through this, I'm trying to create a world in which pregnant women, lactating women, and suffering women are independent actors and valued. And then the reader, of course, is mirrored back in reading that. And I do try to also make it funny because there is a lot in this world that is just so damn dumb that you really, really have to kind of laugh at it. And also Kristin's family life. She already has twin boys. She's got a teenage stepdaughter and now these twin babies. And so this is everything is happening in the family life. And yet in our family lives, we just have to keep motoring on through. I have 3 boys. I've now got 6 grandchildren, and had them here, but not all of them, but a significant portion over the weekend. And I was glad to rest up yesterday. So it's the energy level, you know, it's just much higher than my husband and I are used to. And they're the ones who are my kid mystery book that I've been trying to write. They're the ones who say, well, there's no cat in it. And what are the superpowers? And so I'm not sure I'm going to follow through on that. But I wanted to read one of the last therapy sessions. Each section, every once in a while, there is a section that is a transcript of a therapy section. And it follows, the therapy follows Judith Herman's outline for how people in therapy can recover from trauma. So at the top of each of these chapters, I have a quotation from Herman, from Trauma and Recovery. 7th, this is number 7 in the process. 7th, and finally, the person has reconstructed a coherent system of meaning and belief that encompasses the story of the trauma. And one of the things that happens in the novel is that Alice Matthews does take hold of, she's not consuming the victimization anymore. She is using it to help someone else. And parenthetically, a colleague on another faculty in Chicago was a woman who was tortured in South Africa many years ago. And she told me she didn't start to recover until she volunteered in Chicago at the Kovler Center for Terror and Torture. So that it fits with her experience, that she takes hold of what has happened to her and incorporates it into her approach, a renewed approach to the world. So here's the therapy. I have put in initials for her and for the therapist. The therapist is SH. SH, good to see you. How have these last weeks been? AM, better, I think, though it's weird. SH, what's weird? AM, well, Kristin, you know her, got me this appointment. SH, yes. AM, right, well, as is typical of her, she's running around trying to find who did for that guy. SH, does it trouble you to say his name? Pause. AM, yeah, some. SH, that's okay. Just another thing to work on at some point. So Kristin is trying to find the murderer. AM, yeah, exactly. And you'd think it'd make me feel worse, but it doesn't. And she's found all this stuff about how coaches are getting away with, you know, not just in other places, but here, and it's a pattern. You know, Dr. Hill, there's so much of it. It makes me so angry, and I want to do something about it. SH, I know. It can feel like it's everywhere. AM, exactly. So now I'm doing my own research and seeing how they operate, these guys. And I think I see why he was a threat to somebody. and how he got away with it for so long. SH, you are taking over the investigation. AM, well, not taking over exactly, but doing it and pushing forward. Kristin's not 100% with her twins and all, and she gets pulled into other stuff. I need to push on this. And my partner, Mel Billman, from the campus police, he's totally in. I'm not alone in looking into it. SH, are there trigger points for you? Like what kinds of things can make you feel a little panic? AM, well, reading about all that's happened with girls and women reporting, I feel like, I don't know, a pull toward the panic. It's out there, but it's not gotten me, if you get that. I can breathe and keep it away, keep it out there, you know? SH, yeah, I think I do. AM, I don't think we're done here, though. SH, why is that? AM, because when we find his murderer, that will be what you call a trigger. SH, I think you're right. AM, so I'll text you when we do and come see you. SH, you sound confident you'll find his murderer. AM, oh yes, me, Kristin, and Mel, nobody gonna escape us for long. Nobody ever has. So that's the last therapy session that I've written about. So this book is obviously, it's just a straight up murder mystery. This abusive coach is murdered. Got to find the bad guy. But it's the university politics, it's the trauma, and so forth. But I, in coming, to the end of my presentation here, I just want to make clear that these times are in and of themselves being designed to traumatize and victimize, especially women, but women, vulnerable people. I have a transgender granddaughter, and you want to see me go ballistic. I'm like to go to the Supreme Court and say, what are you thinking? But I don't think that's going to go well. I don't. We have told our granddaughter, that if she feels unsafe where she lives, she can come live with us in California. So, you enrage a grandmother and you are going to have trouble. Seriously, I promise you that. But overall, LGBTQIA friends are like, what now? And the ground is shifting. What can we count on? Are our rights stable? Can they be taken away? And this is traumatic. This is traumatic. And it's on purpose. It's on purpose. I think this parade of sex offenders that are being thrown out there to, apparently people with absolutely no knowledge of the field in which they will be appointed can still be appointed. But that too is disconcerting. That makes you feel like the ground under you is moving. And what do we do to keep our balance? And I've said it before, and I try to show it in the novel. We talk about it. We talk about what is bothering us. And we do so with people who are accepting and supportive. And we, wherever we can and however we can, we take action against it. Because action against it is very healing. So, Mayor, that's 22 minutes. So let me stop there and open for discussion.
Thanks so much. This has been Susan Thistlethwaite talking about her new mystery novel, Surfacing, Kristin Ginelli mystery. And I have to say, Susan, hearing you talk about it and now having read the book twice, I see some new things that I didn't see before. but the one that's most chilling to me is the question of the purposefulness of this kind of lifting up of people whose crimes in other circumstances would have landed them in some kind of prison situation. And
Yeah.
now the inmates have the keys, and this is really very, very troubling. I also was struck, and I'll just make one comment, and then I'm going to open it wide up. But I was struck by how many forms of trauma people have experienced, from birth and early life trauma, for some about which they can verbalize very little, oftentimes, to the trauma of students experiencing live shooters in their schools, which would be, the generation of my daughter and your grandkids. And the sexual trauma is endless. Marie Fortune, who's a great authority on these questions, long ago said that all women are abused or living in the fear of it. All women are abused or living in the fear of it. And I didn't quite get it at the time. And as I have lived longer, I have understood more deeply what she meant. And that seems to create a very different starting point than the notion that violence is the exceptional situation and safety is the norm.
Yes.
In fact, it's the reverse. I
Yeah.
wrote about this years ago when I said that violence is really not episodic and justice is not the norm. Violence is the norm, and safety or justice is episodic.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
regret to say that I was very right, and I think she's right. What do you think? Is it time to really name that so that we begin to change the starting point rather than trying to deal with violence here and violence there and violence there and lack of safety? I mean, it's ubiquitous at this point. And in
Yeah.
some ways, I think it would add to our analysis to start there.
Yes, and you've read Women's Bodies as Battlefield. So
Right.
I believe that Western culture is steeped in violence. It's norm, right? Just exactly what you were saying. So absolutely. I see Jeanette has raised her hand.
Yes, let's go. So here's the time when we go to Q&A discussion. Everybody's welcome. Please make your comments as brief as you can, and feel free to use at the bottom of the screen where the react button is. Please feel free to use the raise hands button. If you're not comfortable with that and you want to just wave your hand, that's okay too. We'll start with Jeanette Stokes, and say your name and where you're from or something so that we get a who's here. Because I do think, Susan, you put your finger on it, that one of the things we have to do is not only talk about this, but talk about it out loud and together. And that's the issue, not just in the therapeutic setting, but which I know you were not suggesting in the least, but out loud and together, and to begin to quote unquote normalize this context that we have been taught wrongly about. We've been taught the opposite. Go ahead, Jeanette, and then we'll go to Sherry White.
Thank you, Susan. Brilliant comments, and I look forward to reading the book, which I have not read yet. I have three very quick things. The first is that I had occasion to meet the two young women who founded EROC, End Rape on Campus, which they were students at UNC. And I have followed their work and have been really grateful for it. And I will be sure that they know about the novel. Also, I wanted to say that I remember you with three little boys. And I came to your, Susan and her family lived on the Duke campus and were like dorm parents. And I remember having a conversation with you with these three kids and being stunned at how well you could follow the conversation and interact with these three little ones. One was on your lap and the other two were at your knees. I had never seen anybody do that before. So not only can lactating women or mothers think, I think that during that period of a mother's life, probably fathers too, the ability to multitask and to still be clear about all the threads, it's burned in my memory because it was so stunning to me. And the third thing is I have a colleague here in Durham who was on a team that worked in Colorado with a military academy to try to figure out how to help people who were soldiers who were returning from war,
Mhm.
and used all of the somatic experiencing learning to help them in crisis. And so I have made myself a list of people I want to give the mystery to. So thank you.
Well, I will confess, Jeanette, that age tends to erode that capacity for multitasking. It's still there, but I maybe can't do 10 things at the same time. It's down to 5, 7. But I actually think that's living a woman's life. I really do. There are so many demands on us from so many directions, and socialized not to say no. And I think, if we could all agree on this call that saying no is just fine, that we don't have to do everything is also terribly important. But, that's the beauty of having known somebody for that's 50 years, Jeanette. We've known each other. That's a fairly long time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, great. And also I can't pass the opportunity to say that for women of color, this is a very much exacerbated problem and reality. And I think that for those of us who are white women, it's important to keep that firmly in our minds, especially in terms of what's possible for people to do and to still survive. And that's really hard. Jeanette, thank you. The old Smithies go back a long ways, huh?
I see Barbara Anderson, your hand is raised, but let me just interject just a second about my daughter-in-law over the weekend asked me, do you get any criticism for having, as a white woman, writing about African-American women? And in the novel, and not just in this novel, but in all of them, I always have a strong, but I hope real African-American character. And my Kristin Ginelli is white. And they argue. And Alice confronts Kristin from time to time about her white privilege, unconscious assumptions that she makes. And in the When Demons Float, they have a big argument because Kristin does something to confront the people who are the white supremacists. And Alice says to her, if I did that, by the next day, I'd be dead. So you think you're so brave, but are you brave enough to walk around in an African-American woman's skin? And Kristin has to say, no, I'm not. So, but I've been incredibly blessed over my life to have taught at a seminary that's about 50% African-American students. And I've learned a lot from them, but let me tell you, you cannot assume as a white woman like I am that you're not going to make mistakes. And the same thing is true of heterosexual privilege. It's not as though there's just one privilege that kind of packages me. I'm middle class, I'm educated, and so forth. And you have to be a white person of privilege in this country these days. You have to tell yourself 6 lies before breakfast, before you can even get along in this culture. And just knowing that they are lying is very important. But this is not easy. And of course, anything that I write, I have a circle of friends such as Mary and others, including African-American women. The therapist that I consult with is African-American. But there's no solving this, okay? There's no solving this. The best you can do is try to bring it to consciousness and absolutely know you're going to screw up anyway. Now, where'd Barbara go? There you are.
Okay, and your models do help us. Okay, Barbara Anderson, then we'll go back to Sherry White and Rosemary Ganley. Barbara, you're gonna have to unmute yourself. You know how to do that? Maybe we can unmute from the office. Can we unmute Barbara Andelson, please, from the office?
I think
There we are. There you go. Thanks.
Real quickly, this got me thinking about a piece of intellectual genealogy. Very early in my career, I worked with the first woman I ever knew of who wrote about violence against women, who had had the experience and wrote about it. Her name was Mary Pellauer.
Oh, yeah.
Pellauer.
Right.
With whom Susan wrote a book, if my memory
I
serves
did.
me.
I wrote a book with her. Yeah.
And Mary, in very early work, she and I and one other woman did the first volume on feminist ethics that was from multiple viewpoints.
Yeah.
It came out about the same time as Beverly Harrison's first book came out. So you had one voice, and then you had almost at the same time multiple voices. I haven't read that essay in years, but she developed a concept she called moral callousness. And I think the way she meant it was when something hurts you so much, you have a tendency to build a shell around it to sort of protect yourself from the constant pressure of the hurting. But in this context, I'm thinking, and this is totally me, Mary Pellauer has no responsibility for this next thought. I think, in a sense, these Trumpian people are pressing us to develop moral calluses where they present to us the most horrible people who are clearly, who seem clearly to have a long pattern of being assaulters, and we're supposed to not feel it, not recognize it. Yeah. The callous is impeding our reaction from the outside instead of protecting us from the inside, which was Mary's meaning of it.
Thanks so much, Barbara. Susan?
Barbara,
Good to have you with us, Barbara.
I took this, the Substack on an administration of sex offenders, and I posted a clip from it and a link on TikTok, and the trolls went nuts. I mean, they hate it when you don't develop the callus. Exactly right. I totally agree with you. Who is next?
Sherry White is next. Go ahead, Sherry.
Yeah, hello, everyone. I'm located in Nashville, Tennessee, and I want to say thank you to Susan because I'm finally seeing you physically after having heard about you. And thanks to an article that Mary wrote on women theologians writing novels as a way to get certain themes across is how I discovered that aspect of you. And so I read Malice, which was the only one I've read thus far. And I just want to say that it touched me because I think that's the one that has to do with the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I spent my whole childhood in Cuba, and we had just left in 1960. And I can clearly remember living through here in Nashville as a high schooler. What's going to happen to the land that we love so much and where we lived and grew up? My dad was a professor at the seminary in Matanzas.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm very concerned about violence towards women. And so I've been trying to promote Thursdays in Black, which is a World Council of Churches program, which is a very small step, but at least a significant one to start creating consciousness. So every Thursday I wear black, I put a pin on, and that has attracted some very interesting comments. If I'm in a store, I've already had several women say, hey, what's that all about? And admit to me that they are a survivor of domestic violence. And the last thing I want to mention is the fact that there is a listing of all the states in the United States as to where they stand on domestic violence. And sadly, the state of Tennessee is 5th in the nation for the death of women due to domestic violence.
Yeah.
And, here we are sitting in the Bible Belt, and it's just mind-boggling to think that that's a reality here. So thanks.
Sure. Also, the number one indicator that someone will be a mass shooter is they are a domestic abuser. And I live in California now, lived in Colorado, and co-chaired the Moms Demand Gun Sends for my area. We lobbied for a red flag law, and red flag laws are to take guns away from domestic abusers and or other people who might be a danger to themselves. And this really saves lives. So these violences that you're talking about, they are interwoven one with the other. And it's very, very helpful. Thank you. Next person.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. Okay, Rosemary Ganley. I think you see an article coming on, but go ahead, Rosemary.
Oh, I just want to make 2 quick points, Susan. One, I would like to honor the field that you're working in now to make things better. You're a serious theological thinker, and you have chosen a kind of a more popular style. And that echoes what I'm doing, but although I'm not an academic, I choose the local newspaper where I have 600 words a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to keep a sense of humor, but there are serious themes at work. So thank you for that. But the other thing is a message from Canada. On Friday, we mark a national day of pointing to violence against women. It commemorates a terrible episode in Montreal 35 years ago when a student shouting, "I'm going to kill all feminists," and he separated the men from the women and shot down and killed 14 engineering women students.
Yeah.
So we'll be demonstrating, and I'm going to carry a sign saying, "Educate boys and men." But I'd just like you to comment on that. And thank you, Susan, so much.
Yeah. Well, I so applaud your writing for the public. I wrote for the Washington Post. I wrote a column every week for the Washington Post for 10 years. And for the Huffington Post, the Chicago Tribune, the Dallas Morning News, and as Mary pointed out, then in the Vail Daily. I write some for the Santa Cruz Sentinel here, though they are very squishy about which of the things of mine they'll publish. But it's so important to get these things out into the general public. I couldn't agree with you more. And I know that incident. Let's face it, patriarchy is lethal. Patriarchy is legal. And it's either violence or it's the threat of violence. And that had, I know from Canadian friends, that incident had a chilling effect. When I say trauma is contagious, so many women got trauma from what was done to those women. So, gee, I so applaud you for that, writing for the public. I wrote a course for years called Public Theology, trying to convince the students to write for the public. Some do, but I have in recent years been contacted by graduates of those courses that when they are hired by a local church, they have to agree not to write for the public. And it's outrageous. So talk about free speech. These are United Church of Christ churches. So it's appalling. Thank you.
Is that legal? I mean, I can see where they could
If
write,
they-
but they
if
can't
they
write under
sign
their
the
own
letter.
name, and
Yeah,
can't they write with a
they-
disclaimer and say, this is my view, not of the church?
If they sign the letter when they're being hired, yes, it's legal. I actually checked that with, I had a wonderful lawyer who was the in-house counsel when I was president, and I checked with him. And if they sign the letter, then it's legal. But it's made clear to them in the hiring process, if they don't sign the letter, they're not going to be hired. So it's inherently coercive.
Right. I just have another quick question, and then I'm going to move us to the end and then leave it open to continue conversation for those who wish. What a rich session. I can't even, I'm just not over it. I'm not over it. There's a difference between trauma with PTSD and moral injury. And so
Yeah.
many of our good colleagues, I'm thinking of Rita Brock and others, have been doing such amazing work on moral injury. And I'm wondering if you could just say something about the difference and what's the role of moral injury, for example, in the case of in the story that you're telling, especially for those who may have observed others, including their daughters, being harmed,
Yeah.
abused. I was struck by that because we've never talked about that. I just wonder if you could just a brief comment, and then we'll go to the announcements and then continue conversation. But I think moral injury may not be maybe something that many people don't know about.
Yeah. Well, as I understand it, and I am by no means an expert on moral injury, that it develops when you yourself are complicit or think you are complicit in violence. I invited Rita and a colleague to come and make a presentation in Vail, Colorado, very widely attended. And the person she brought with her had been a guard at Abu Ghraib, where the torture of prisoners took place by the American military. And she talked about, she personally did not, this veteran did not participate in the torture, but the moral injury that she felt she had sustained from having been in that context and not having done anything about it. So I think that's the element of moral injury, that is the sense of complicity that one can have in these complicated and, you know, Mary, you pointed out, structurally violent times. What are we going to do if the military starts rounding up immigrants and deporting them? What are we going to do? And if we do nothing, I believe we're complicit. So I know our church is looking into becoming a sanctuary church. We have a lot of undocumented folks here in California. So I think that's where they strengthen each other, Mary, but they are different. Trauma being the wound, the injury, the emotional hit. I mean, a massive car accident can be a trauma. You're, you know, in that, but also can an assault and so forth. So I think, as I understand it, and from listening to Rita, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that sums it up. It also adds to the number of people who are affected, as it were. In other words, if we were going to say that the Trump people with sexual abuse histories bring in many more people, well, certainly those who don't have the actual abuse itself, but also have maybe witnessed it or seen it close up in their family or whatever, are added to that number. So you're right, it's an overwhelming proportion. I think it's our context right now.
Yeah.
Susan, thank you so much. I have not exaggerated one moment about the value of this book, and I think follow Jeanette Stokes right to the bookstore and get some for gifts for the holidays and have some good conversations in the year to come. Let me just remind you of the fact that the audio recording will be on our website at www.waterwomensalliance.org with the notes we've taken and Susan will provide us, I hope, with some of hers, and we'll make sure that the publishing information, which is in the chat, will be available in the report that we make. So let me simply mention the upcoming water programs. On this Sunday, the 8th, Water and Women of Dignity will have our quarterly meeting, and the topic on this good Marian Holy Day is What Would Mary Say? An Advent liturgy. What would Mary say? That's at 11:30 in the morning Eastern Time on Sunday, December the 8th, focusing on the indelible influence in art and culture and social justice of the figure of Mary. And for many, she has informed how we experience the world. What would she say today? We'll look at her many faces and particularly focus on her as a symbol of those who are oppressed, forgotten, and in search of community, an immigrant single woman under distress. Her numbers are legion. This event is open to all lesbian, bi, trans, queer women, as well as those identifying as non-binary and gender expansive, and all of our women friends. The second thing I want to announce is that Monday, the very next day, on the 9th of December, we will have our water meditation at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Kate Moody on Inner Light. This is obviously a reference to the solstice in the Northern Hemisphere and coming to the end of our worst, our darkest period, perhaps, and the beginning of the light bursting forth in various parts of the world. So we'll look at strategies for cultivating and connecting with our inner light. We will need it. And then the third program will be on Tuesday, December the 17th at 7:30 p.m., a solstice of resistance, solidarity, and recommitment. So the meditation on Monday the 9th at 7:30 and the liturgy on Tuesday, December 17th with Diane New and the water community. A solstice of resistance, solidarity, and recommitment. And this is a chance to pause, reconsider, refresh, recommit. The darkness, the dormancy, silent beauty of winter offer time for new visions to emerge. Mysteries lie in darkness. The warmth of the summer sun heralds new opportunities. We will celebrate it all, honoring resistance, solidarity, and recommitment. So please feel free to join us. As you know, all water programs are open to everyone except for ones that we put a little restriction on, like the Sunday event. The Elaine Donaldson Fund helps us to make that possible, and your donations are needed and welcome. We try to socialize the resources so that those who can donate do so and make water programs available to everyone without charge. It seems to work. We believe that if we share among us, there's enough. If we share among us, there's enough. And Susan, you've shared today, and among us, there's plenty. So thank you for your words, for your wisdom, and for joining us with this marvelous new book, which I hope many people will read. It might be fun to have another conversation about it after more people have read it and really dig in.
Yeah, I'd certainly be open to that, when they
Yeah. And
I actually like it when people do the reading,
yeah, you're an old professor, Susan.
Yeah. And there are discussion, if your group wants to, there are discussion questions in the
That's
back.
right.
So
Yeah, there are discussion questions at the back of the book, and there are also, as Susan mentioned, resources, which I think are recommended reading, both on trauma and on assault and sexual violence. And one of the things, Susan, I'm going to just move us right along to continued conversation, if we might, just for a minute. Again, thanking those for being with us. We have to leave now, but keeping the Zoom open for a bit. I like very much how you handle the question of triggers, because you know that these topics that you take up are very much triggering for many people. And I think you've been a model for how to do that. Do you have advice for other people about how we might do that, even in the non literary, that is to say, in the general writing? I just think it's so hard, especially with students being so used to now getting a trigger warning. What do you say we do?
well, there is a trigger warning in the beginning of the book.
Yes, I know that. That's what I mean. That's what I'm referring to as a model. But I'm just wondering how
And-
you suggest that we do that. For example, if one of your Substacks is going to be triggering, or if an article that I write in RD is triggering. I mean, what's the responsibility at this point to acknowledge that and to warn people?
Well, that's a really good question, Mary. Because of my approach to writing for the public, I try to put the entire argument in the heading. And so that will pop up in somebody's email. And no, you're making me think, have I done enough?
Well, I'm asking it for myself because I don't think I have done enough. And I think that some of the things that I write about, particularly with regard to things like abuse in the Catholic Church and, some of those things that could be so toxic for people that you don't want to turn people off before they start reading. On the other hand, what's fair? Things are pretty grim, and we can't assume that everybody has the resources that we have, some of us, to deal with these things, whether community or counseling or whatever. We can't make any assumptions about that. So I don't know. I feel like I'm sort of out of that conversation, but I'd like to get in it.
Boy, when we were working, I was part of a team for the United Church of Christ to write our successful resolution on renewed commitment to reproductive justice. And there are so many areas in reproductive justice that are so painful for people. And, where do we put the warning, that we're going to be discussing? Because it wouldn't be much of a resolution if we weren't discussing miscarriage and so forth. But one young woman who's a member of the team says, but when I see a trigger warning, it triggers me. So
Yeah.
I, honest to God, don't think there's a right answer to this.
Mhm.
But you're making me think of because on the Substack, I could certainly do a discussion of this at the end of each column and recommend. If this caused you distress, you may want to consider. Because I'm a big believer in counseling. Over all the years, I've been in therapy myself a couple of times, counseling students and saying, I've taken you about as far as I can. You really need to see the people that we have on staff. And as a pastor and so forth, you don't want to overreach, but on the other hand, I'd be interested in the wisdom of the group, because we've got trigger warnings on the TV now. And does that help? Or does it absolve?
Mhm.
I went round and round on this, whether to put that trigger warning in or not, because the first person counseling sessions, and I ended up revising the counseling sessions, and I had been quite physical in the descriptions by Alice of what was done to her as a teenager. And I backed that down. And what I had her, she says, I can't say it, which is common, of course. And the therapist says, could you write it? And so passes her a pad. So it's left to the reader not to have to be subjected to the graphics of what has actually happened. I was really quite comfortable with having done that, because I'm confident it's good therapy, and yet so I don't, the ever popular, I don't know, Mary.
Well, we don't know everything, Susan. That's why we have tomorrow. So
that's
we'll
right.
figure it out. And if we can't, let's go to Jean Christensen and see what she has to say.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about a couple of different things. One, when I was victims advocate at the diocese, and it was the era where they were having all these healing sessions at churches and what have you, would say to whoever was planning, please have appropriate persons present should somebody have a response or trigger during a session.
Yeah.
We also always had a list of recommended counselors, psychologists available, multiples, not one, here it is, you have to. So that's one instance. The other one has to do with the both in person and virtual presentations that we do on human trafficking, where we are educating persons about what it is, and you never know who might be in your audience. So again, it's a matter of if this triggers something, if this sets something off for you,
Mhm.
feel free to leave if it's either way. If we can have people present who can assist them, we do that. There's a gentleman in Kansas City. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, but worked with him down in KC, and he does students, usually junior high, senior high. He has a whole raft of persons available when he does a presentation, because it's school-wide usually, who can assist. And he said he has never done one that he has not had students come up to him and say, that happened to me.
Yeah.
Some kind of abuse taking place. So, it's we don't always know, and we can't always get everything, but we can do the best we can with trying to have persons available who can assist them. Now, that's kind of your real life. That's a little different than if you're reading it in a book and something happens, but.
Yeah, I ended up going with the trigger warning because it's giving the choice over to the reader, right? And what abuse does is take your choice away, right? This I control you. What is this horrible thing that's circulating around your body, my choice? But giving the choice, and I also did this in my classes, and in my fictional professor does this in her classes, where she starts the class by saying, I acknowledge that some of this may be troubling for you. If you want to leave the class, please do so. It's no penalty. And so I think that probably is our guideline. What you're describing is, Janine, is the support available is also really crucial, because that's also an acknowledgement. It's okay for you to feel the way you feel, right? And my character Alice, who has the freeze response, freezes on campus, and she manages to call the therapist, and the therapist says, go immediately to the emergency room. And she's like, I don't need that. And the therapist says, yes, you do. And just the shaming and the blaming that is so common. Well, what's the shaming and the blaming about? Judith Herman talks about this all the time. The goal of patriarchal society is to shut you up. And so affirming that you can say and you can choose and you can be, I think, is the goal of what we're all talking about here, that we won't shut up. We won't shut up. But thanks for that. That's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Jean and Veronica Dunn.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I have two things. So I wanted to say just on this about triggers. For a significant part of my life, I worked in counseling within a provincial addiction treatment facility. And I came to, we had backup resources, but I came to believe and would say to clients, if this is here for you, if it's been triggered, it means you're ready to face it. And so we kept going.
Yeah.
And I think just that, for my experience, just the permission that, or to the person, you're ready to go and keep going. My trouble with all the trigger warnings is it's like nobody ever gets better. You always, there's all, it's sort of, are we saying you're more likely to be triggered than to be healed? So I've been out of the field for a while. Maybe there's more recent thinking about it, but that was my experience.
Well, in addiction, of course, very much related to trauma, because people are self-medicated.
Yeah.
And whether it's, a big response to trauma, unresolved trauma, is smoking. as well as, drugs, alcohol, and so forth. So I can imagine in your
Yeah.
work, these two were, so closely related. I have my character Alice smoke like a stack. And her trying to not smoke. And so Kristin says, okay, because Kristin is drinking 12 cups of coffee a day, and recognize she's also self-medicating for her fatigue, right? And so she says, if you give up smoking, I will give up coffee. And so this is a sub thing, but it's about how addictions are there, right there in everyday life for us. And they are self-medicating.
Yeah. And then where I was working too, we looked at process addictions too. Addictions are what works to take away the pain. So it might be booze, it might be drugs, it might be shopping, it might be working, it might be just some addictions are more acceptable, socially acceptable. So that the other thing I just wanted to say was I was very struck about your sense that this is being on purpose, this kind of to strike fear into the hearts of the people. Yesterday, I was at supper and somebody mentioned that Donald Trump was going to the opening of Notre Dame in Paris. Physically, I've never had this experience before, but just physically, there was just like a wave of revulsion that raced through my body. I couldn't believe, like it felt like desecration.
Yeah, well, it is, right? Let's call it what it is. Yeah. Of course, I'm pretty sure he's not the first massive sinner who's gone through the doors of Notre Dame.
No, but he's
in my the kings of France, who, for example, who were really scumbags. So, but yeah, it's physical, isn't it? It's so.
It was.
It's just there, and no, I can relate to that.
And so important to name it as such and take it seriously as such, because that kind of revulsion is uncommon. We had an experience recently, Diane and I, of being at a funeral for one of the great leaders in Roman Catholic women's ordination movement, at which her family, it was a military burial at Arlington, and her family apparently had other ideas, but it was never mentioned the incredible work she had done as a feminist and as a leader and as a peacemaker and as a supporter of people in Central America. All the things that she had done through the 90 years of her life were erased by the fact that the sermon was given about her being a wife and mother. And there were 5 of us, and we had an absolutely common physical reaction against. We were all of us were just shaken by it, such that we 4 of us couldn't even go to the reception. We just couldn't do it. Happily, the 5th one went to the reception and told the whole story. This was just a wonderful ending to the tale. But it's that physical, when you feel, at least for me, it's when I feel it physically that something is so profoundly wrong. And to come to trust that, and to name it, and to share it, and to see that other people have the same thing, it's enormously important for survival and for thriving in this horrible situation we're in. And I mean, I don't know, maybe time will come whether, was the fire worse, or was Donald Trump's visit to Notre Dame worse? We'll see. But this is the same kind of thing, the physical, that feeling in your gut that you can't ignore.
Yeah.
I needed a seatbelt to restrain me in the pew. I think it was. Wait, run up and like they do it, no, this is wrong. You've got this totally, incredibly, massively wrong.
Yeah. Well, Bev Harrison says, a feeling signal that all is not well. And Bev Harrison.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And then spirit is in the body. I mean, but taking care of our bodies during these years, let's get that our heads around that we're going to be resisting this it's so important. Eat right, sleep right, do your exercise, do your yoga, and so forth and so on. That otherwise you're not going to make it through the journey, and collapsing is not going to help anybody. So I'm big believer in that, and practice self-care pretty religiously.
Well, and what you said earlier about, if in fact the police, if in fact the military go after immigrants, I would only change one word, when, because I don't think there's any question at this point, and I think it's going to be in lots of places, and probably, what's it called, fear and of awe, or whatever they used to,
Shock and awe.
Shock and awe.
shock and
Yeah.
awe. I think it's going to be shock and awe for a lot of people, but this is a time to be thinking about what that means.
Mhm.
Yeah, our church is investigating becoming a sanctuary church. This is a pretty active movement that is spreading throughout California. So it's back to Central America again.
Mhm.
Yep.
Well, anyway,
Well, folks, let's
lots
move
to
along.
do.
Susan, thank you.
My next novel features undocumented immigrants as the protagonists.
Wow.
Well, I am waiting with my with bated breath, and we'll read it with great interest as I do. And I want to thank those who are with us and those who've already, some had to get off, obviously, but really just great to have this kind of a session to get the word out. And I think you sold some books too, Susan.
I think I did. Yeah.
I think that the bottom line here is that we want more, and you've obviously lucked onto or found your way onto or into a genre that really does the performative theology that you describe in a way that's, the only thing I can put it up next to is when Victoria Rue's work in theater is at its, is out there. Victoria's done a lot of both now film and plays and a book, and that is performative theology of a marvelous sort, and yours is another kind. So yes, great.
I
Can I
think,
just
I think the arts will save us, because that's what they're for. I really do. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Veronica.
I just want to add, and kind of performative counseling too, the way you have them move
Yeah.
through the.
I wanted to demystify counseling for anybody like, ooh,
Yeah.
I could do that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have said before, but I'm going to say it again. I do think your books save lives. I think that you provide orientation and direction for people away from things that are toxic and toward things that are healing. And I really appreciate that so very much. And I think it's, it's not probably why you sit down to write in the morning, but I think if you can also take account of the fact that that's what happens, it might keep you going.
I'm just glad Mary Hunt has read the book twice already, because it now means that I get to have the copy. And Rosemary, I'll probably be reading it on the flight to visit you.
Okay. Yes, and have a wonderful event there.
Oh yes, that's going to be.
Like it's going to be
That's
fabulous.
going to be the big one. That's the big one.
Okay. Yes.
And no tickets. We were not even going to the event. We can't. There's 2 tickets. She has 3 sons.
Yeah.
So out of towners are not even.
2 tickets.
You get 2 tickets for the thing. You get more for graduation, for heaven's sake.
And we're having a party. So Veronica,
We're going for the party.
The party's important.
December
We're going
12th.
in a private capacity. We're going to the party. I want to make clear that people don't think we're running off on a junket for water. We are going in a private capacity.
Wow.
So
That's exciting.
it will be fun.
Rosemary is receiving the Order of Canada on December the 12th. That's
Yeah.
We
Oh,
heard.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But I don't know. What do you call someone who's in the order? What do you call a person who is in the Order of Canada? They have a special title?
You can use the initials CM after your title.
Oh, Rosemary Ganley CM.
Rosemary Ganley CM. RBGCM.
which stands for what?
It stands for a member of the Order of Canada. And
Canadian Mountie.
Okay.
and then it comes with a, Susan, you'll like this. The motto is, they desire a better country.
Oh, that's lovely. That's so lovely. That's fun. Do you get
Can
a
you
hat?
move to the United States, Rosemary, and kind of put that vibe all around.
I said earlier, I think before you got on,
We've got
Diane,
our Trumpers in waiting.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, right.
Well,
we all
why did Trudeau go to kiss the ring?
No,
do.
no, no.
Mar-a-Lago.
Doesn't meet with
I
Trump in
I
Canada.
don't think
Canada will
he
not
was going
admit
to kiss the ring.
felons.
He didn't go to kiss the ring?
No,
I don't think
well,
so.
he had to meet with him in the US because Canada will not admit convicted felons.
That's right.
This is true. This is absolutely true.
That's true.
But
Yeah.
what do you think he got out of it? Did it work?
Well, I'm sure he's concerned about the tariffs.
Yeah, no, that's what he went to be. That's
Yeah,
what he went to talk
yeah.
about. Yeah.
It's all about the welfare of our people.
Yeah.
And
All right.
the truth is, Canada is responsible for Canadians' borders. The US is responsible for US borders. And so just even to be clear with Trump, that's what we will be responsible for and what we're not responsible for, that is his responsibility.
Well, there are so many other things we can talk about, but one thing that sometimes cheers me up is that he has a very short attention span. So he's
Doesn't
like,
remember.
the tariffs.
Where's Canada? Where I read about that once. Where's
Right.
Canada?
It's like, exactly. I was like, it's
no,
over here. in
No,
the
it's over.
ocean. Okay.
All right. Well,
Right.
we'll all be there next week, Rosemary.
All right.
Yeah.
In spirit.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Susan.
Thank
Ta-ta.
Thank you. This
Thank
was
you
just
to our water
great.
people for IT.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
IT
you.
people. Auf Wiedersehen. How do you exit here?
Let's see. You can get out. Why don't we stay on for a minute, water, just for a second,
Okay.
where we are. Yeah, I don't want Leah Howell. Maybe we could let Leah Howell out. Yeah. Okay. And maybe turn off the recording.
Oh, yes.